Well, hello and welcome. My name is Mark Epner. I'm a Chicago-based pilot with over half of my 2,000 plus hours in a Cirrus SR-22. Currently, I fly this 2011 normally aspirated G3, but also fly other aircraft when the opportunity presents itself. I love flying every bit as much as you do and look for ways to share that common bond through multiple paths, including this channel, as well as Simple Flight Radio, which you can find at simpleflight.net. My goal for the channel is to share my passion for aviation with others that share that same sentiment and do so with an eye towards proficiency, safety, and fun. Welcome. I'm so glad you could join us today as my wife and I prepare to depart the Kansas City area at Johnson County Executive Airport, heading back to our home airport of Chicago Executive. It should be a relatively uneventful flight. We're expecting clear skies in the beginning part. When we get into Illinois, we're going to see a deck below us, probably pick up some ice as we descend in. And unlike our trip in where we had a 30-knot headwind, we're going to get the benefit of a lowly 5-knot tailwind. Funny how it doesn't really work out all the time. And expect some turbulence, but nothing that we can't both put up with. But we're not going to be talking much about flying today. What we are going to be talking about is a topic that's come up over the last couple of years, and I've seen even renewed energy around the questions that we're going to deal with today. Over the last couple of years, I've seen so many people that have decided to get into flying and take that next step where they're now asking about ownership or partnerships. While it seems like a rather straightforward question, it really becomes more of a complex answer. At a very high level, a decision between sole ownership versus shared ownership may come down to nothing more than what is your required aircraft performance combined with your financial capabilities. For example, if you require a 6-seat, 200-knot aircraft with air conditioning and capable of flying into known icing conditions, that may drive you into a different decision rather than if you were a pilot just looking to build hours in a 100-knot 2-seat trainer. So regardless, let's look at the basic pros and cons of sole versus shared ownership. With sole ownership, the plane is always the way you left it. Your headset stays in the airplane, it's connected. You have total freedom as to when you take your plane and when you leave it on the ground. The plane is flown exactly how you like it. The avionics are always configured the way that you want it. And any decisions about where to go for fuel, maintenance, purchases are totally up to you, including the timing of those decisions. It is, in one word, autonomy. Now, the downside is, of course, that every cost is borne by you, the sole owner. And, of course, no decision gets made or executed unless you do it. Now, on the shared ownership perspective, we're talking about equity clubs or maybe even non-equity flying clubs, partnerships, fractional options, and, of course, just renting from a flight school. Now, each of these options help your dollars buy more, whether it's more airplane, more capabilities, better airport, better hangar, whatever you want it to be. But in all cases, it makes your dollar go further. In addition to sharing the costs of both purchase and ownership of the airplane, shared ownership also allows you to share the workload of managing the airplane. There is more to owning an airplane than just flying it, and I think this is an area that people underestimate. There are financial duties, maintenance obligations, and operational tasks that must be completed. It's not a minor consideration. An item often overlooked is airplanes need to be used and kept in proper working order. Buying an airplane and flying it for only 25 hours a year is not a good use of your time, not good for the airplane, and certainly not good for your proficiency. With shared ownership, the plane will fly more, which is better for the airplane. It's better for the engine. It's better for the partners, as whether they're sitting left seat or right seat, they'll get more hours in the airplane and therefore have a closer to proficient experience. Going from 25 to 50 hours helps a lot, but 50 to 200 hours helps a lot more. The downside of the partnership, well, the first thing that comes to mind is something we're probably all thinking, is losing unlimited access. Having to keep the plane ready for a partner to fly, meaning you have to clean up after yourself, including carrying or stowing your headset. Maybe it's getting into the airplane and finding the map setup and the avionics as track up instead of north up as you prefer. Or finding too much or too little fuel in your bird when time is critical. Or maybe a partner damages the plane, which impacts your ability to make a required trip. Sometimes in a shared partnership, you have to have those discussions with both or even more partners all want the plane on the 4th of July weekend. How do you resolve that? And those philosophical discussions on what gets fixed and when, and what upgrades are worth the investment when, those are very important considerations. Maybe the most underrated aspect of shared ownership is how do you pick a partner or two? I've seen many great friendships ruined over arguments about airplanes. My dad always joked, "Why would you get married and ruin a good friendship?" Even though he was joking, getting the partnership right is super critical. Personally, I've rented, I've been part of a non-equity flying club, I've invested in a professionally managed fractional program, I've established a dry lease agreement to fly someone else's plane, and for the last 6 years, I've been in a 3-person partnership. Now, those are not serial events because, in fact, I continue to rent from a flying club, and I continue to have a dry lease set up. So I have a SR-22 similar to mine, actually newer, kind of in reserve. So should my plane not be available, I increase the odds of having an airplane available at the last minute. The 3-person partnership works best for me in terms of it provides me the most value at the least cost while ticking the boxes performance and accessibility. The biggest risk was picking the right partners. So let's talk about that for a moment. The key word is going to be alignment. What started as a 2-person plan moved to a 3rd person when this 3rd gentleman came to us and said, hey, they'd like to be part of the partnership. They wanted an SR-22 with air conditioning, the Fiki, the Perspective avionics stack, so on and so forth. This met and ticked every one of their boxes as well. So I have to admit, I was a bit worried knowing how important it was to have 3 aligned partners, but talking to my other partner, we agreed, let's give it a go. So we immediately said to the person, we'll do it, but let's have a conversation first. So we established ground rules around philosophical, financial, scheduling, operational, and personal alignment. Not only for the purchase amount and for future payments, we all agreed that we all had to have the financial resources to, quote unquote, write a check. The plane could not be a collateral to a loan. We also established rules that included fixed amount monthly checks that would be put into our shared bank account to handle, again, those fixed amounts, and an hourly Hobbs wet rate, which would be billed monthly. We agree that all squawked airworthy items would be fixed ASAP, and non-airworthy items would be discussed immediately and determine what were our next steps associated with that. Upgrades or purchases would be discussed and voted on. Majority rules. But I will tell you, there were times where one person really wanted something and the other 2 did not. We didn't automatically vote that person down. We'd talk about it, apply a little respect and empathy to the discussion, in the end say, you know what? It's not that big of a deal. If you really want it that bad, let's go ahead and get it. So those things happened all the time, which really demonstrated at its foundation our partnership was based on mutual respect and trust with a good dose of empathy. Another important discussion point, how would we fly the airplane? It included things like power settings, engine temperatures, lean peak, rich peak, type and quality of airports to be used, requirements for overnight hangars at remote airports, unless, of course, the partners agreed to waive any rule for a specific situation. Further, each member was given a responsibility. We divided it between financial, maintenance, and operations. The person accountable for each task would make most of the decisions in that area, but discussions could and did come up that overruled that person. And I'll be honest, discussions came up more than we thought they would, but generally decisions were made and not overruled. Those that were and those discussion items were really around maintenance. What maintenance shops would we use? Who are we comfortable with? What work would be deferred versus what would be done at the annual, for example? Personally, I have operations, and therefore I am ensuring that the databases are updated, the plane looks and runs well, the partners are kept up with their proficiency, which means I make sure the knowledge levels of what we need to know. For instance, hey, it's 2 years since you did your known ice training. If you want to remain a Fiki bird, flight into known icing, take the Cirrus training and get that 2-year sign-off so we can go forward. Or knowing that it needs 5 gallons of TKS fluid in there to also be Fiki certified, if you will. And the last thing was, doing some training. I'm not a CFI, but I learned the systems and I educated my partners on things that I learned so we could all have a high level of proficiency. From there, the other obvious one is scheduling. how can you have a partnership if everyone wants the same plane on the same day or on the same holiday? So what we did is we thought about assigning, here, you take a week, you take a week, you take a week, and we just roll it over. And then if someone wants someone else's week, you could certainly trade it off. But we decided to kind of back off, be a little bit more informal. So we got an online scheduler and just let people sign up. And if there were conflicts, we'd talk about it. It was basically a first come, first served model. So someone put in for July 4th. Now I want it. I go to that person. Hey, I'd really like to take it. Do you want to trade? Are you willing to trade? If he said yes, then we trade. If he said no, then we wouldn't. That's when I go to my backup options. And we found that really worked because I was a person that would take some non-required flights during the week, although some were required, and then family trips during the weekends, not every weekend. And my partners were a little bit more flexible, that they would just take it maybe for a couple hours stint on a weekend. They'd certainly be willing to give that up so I could go see my grandchildren, for instance. Or they'd be on a Tuesday and, hey, I need to do a business trip on Tuesday. They'd say, okay, great, I'll take Wednesday for my joyride, my proficiency flight, if you will. One of the interesting things that I had to get my head wrapped around is I did have one partner that wanted to fly every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. And that seemed all right, but it felt funny. Here I owned a third of an airplane, and since my family trips were always on weekends, I would always have to get that partner's permission to fly. Now, once I got my head wrapped around that was going to be the way, my experience was 99.9% of the time, he would say, sure, I'll fly Thursday rather than Sunday, or I'll skip my week. Matter of fact, I can only think of one time over many years that he said no, that he needed to keep that flight, and that was fine. So again, don't let the emotion of the mental angst take over from the logic and the empathy that a good partnership brings to the discussions, because it always, or at least all but one time, worked out. Now, the other thing that must take place before you buy the plane is a partnership agreement. It's easy to do this on a handshake, and I don't think we actually signed our document, but we created one that handled everything from how much money we were putting in, how decisions were made, what happens if someone wants to leave the partnership, happens if someone is asked to leave the partnership, what if we want to sell the plane, what if the plane becomes totaled. All of these situations and scenarios were discussed, and how they would be handled was determined next and put in writing. So expectations were set. The other thing is we established that after 3 years, we would either determine to get out of the partnership or move forward. It's important to have that deadline date so that one person doesn't keep putting off, no, I want to continue, no, I want out, that type of thing. So put in a date where it has to be discussed, and then an actual vote be taken whether to continue the partnership. I've used the word partnership a lot, right? And partnerships are like marriages. They are marriages. They take a lot of work and are best when expectations have been set beforehand. It's easy to have a good partnership when things go right. It's when things go wrong that the partnership is truly tested. I've always joked that my marriage has lasted its 45 plus years because we buy 2 tubes of toothpaste. I'm a pilot and therefore squeeze the toothpaste at the bottom. She's not a pilot and therefore squeezes it in the middle. Bugs the heck out of me, but it's not worth fighting about. So we each get our own tube. While that's a bit tongue-in-cheek, at its foundation, it reminds us there are multiple sides to a relationship. It's not just ours. And there's multiple factors, but open communication, empathy, trust, and respect are at the very core of mitigating risk and of building a lasting partnership that really ensures everyone benefits. Now, that's one person's opinion. I'm interested in your opinion. I'm interested in your questions and your experiences. Please leave them below. And until next time, blue skies and tailwinds.